Hello,
What's up?
how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Nice to meet you, Jay.
Jay, nice to meet you too.
Cool, cool. So, where are you now? You in Montana?
I am, yeah.
Oh, okay. So different time zone. Cool.
Yeah.
So let's start with the new album. Let's talk about the album, Shatter The Glass Sanctuary. I think
Yeah.
I think you created something really special. It's I really enjoy it.
Thank you.
So, like, tell me about the concept, how you came up with the music for this record.
Yeah. So a lot of this music, I thought I was going to record this album in June 2020. But that didn't happen for obvious reasons. And the music was written mostly in that time, like 2019. And I was 3 years into living in Missoula after spending a lot of time in Seattle, and I really used the composition process as a way to, you know, process my experience and figure out what's going on in my life and find a way to express that. So most of that music is really about that transition to small town living and being in a beautiful, gorgeous, community oriented place, but also feeling the isolation of being a musician who doesn't live in a city, and kind of navigating that path.
Yeah, totally. It seems like you've had quite a journey. So you were born in Massachusetts, right?
Yeah, yeah, we've moved around a bit, but yeah.
Where I was born in Massachusetts as well. Where in Massachusetts?
Okay, I was born in Pittsfield, like the Berkshires.
Okay. I was born in Worcester. I grew up
Okay,
mostly in Jersey, but yeah. So I know the area. Cool. And
yeah,
then so you moved around so in places where you would more expect a jazz community like Chicago and Boston,
yeah.
right? So what led you to sort of wind up in Montana?
Yeah, so after being born in Western Mass, my family moved to Western North Carolina for a couple years, and then we moved to a west suburb of Chicago. But every summer we would go back to Western North Carolina, and so I loved living in Chicago. It was awesome. That's where I started playing music. I got to do a lot of cool things like the Chicago Youth Jazz Ensemble and get it exposed to a lot of great black music. Um, and every summer I would spend time in the mountains in North Carolina, and I loved it. And it was gorgeous out there. And so in my mind, like city and mountains were so separate. And then I remember the first time I flew to the West Coast, in college, I was visiting some musician friends. And I was like, oh my gosh, out here they just put the city and the mountains all together. This is kind of wild. So I first, after college, moved to the Bay Area and started playing professionally there, and then moved to Seattle. And basically after living in Seattle for a while, I found that I was composing more when I was out of town. I was, traveling or by water. I really like composing by water. So I was like, what if I just flipped this script a little bit and have my home base be in a smaller, more nature oriented kind of place, and then I travel back to cities to perform, and that's pretty much how Missoula came to be. I also have some family here, so that was another reason as well.
Sure. And is there like a community of musicians who play jazz in your area?
There are, yeah, it's small, but there's some players out here, and I think for the size town that there's some good stuff going on, some creative music, and yeah,
Cool. And let's backtrack to the record. I mean,
yeah.
great musicianship, a great band. So are these how did you find these individuals? Are they people you play with regularly or just for this record?
Yeah. So these are all Seattle musicians. So that's like still feels like my hub for music, and they're just all people that I knew from the scene from playing there for many years. And the project, I started playing some of these compositions as a quartet with the rhythm section. Marina Albero on piano, Chris Acasiano on drums, and Kelsey Mines on bass.
Right.
And that felt really good. It was a shift from my last record. I wanted to try a different rhythm section and go with some new players. So I got going with that crew, but I had always imagined this music being a slightly larger ensemble. I was thinking quintet originally, but after working with Allison Miller, she was like, "Go for the sextet," and so I went for it, and I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and I've been trying to think of another, and I'm sure it exists, but I've been trying to think of another record that has this exact instrumentation: trombone, trumpet, piano, guitar,
Yeah.
drums. And it's really unique how just to have the two frontline instruments being brass instruments. Was there an album or something that inspired you to use that instrumentation, or just the musicians themselves?
Mostly the musicians themselves. I was finding myself missing being in. There's something about blending with another brass player that just feels so good. I mean, I love saxophone too, and I can get into that, but there's just this sound and tone quality that you can get into with other brass player that I really enjoy. And Ray, I love his playing and his musicality, and so it was that combination that drew me to that. There wasn't, yeah. Let me know if you find a record because I'm curious now.
Yeah, I mean, I think of like Chet Baker with oh God, the valve trombone player.
Yeah, Bob Brickmeyer.
Yeah. But that was usually like a pianoless quartet, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it's interesting, and
Yeah,
I will let you know because I am going to look. Now, in terms of the music on the record, um, the compositions are all pretty varied, and but yet it seems to have like this unity, and then you also include this suite at the end of it. Can you talk
yeah,
about specifically the suite that's on the record?
yeah. I put it last because I wanted people to have a chance to like get into it. But to me, that really is the heart of the record and sort of the inspiration of the record. And it was sort of my first attempt at doing something longer form, with segues and more through composed, and wanting to integrate free improvisation with composed material and more collective improvisation with composed material.
Right.
Um, so that piece also, I think, from an emotional standpoint, just is really reflective of what kind of opened the gates for me to write some of the other music, especially that last song, Shatter It. It was kind of like just a catharsis for me. I just remember belting out that melody once it goes into the faster three and playing the chords on the piano over and over again, and just like it just was a release for me, really.
Yeah, I mean it works great, and I mean all the musicians are great, but I'm a bass player, and
Yeah.
the bass player is phenomenal, very great player. That
Yeah, Kelsey's
I think
good.
that unaccompanied bass solo on that is it's a little reminiscent of some of like something you might hear maybe even from Coltrane. He would do that at times with Garrison. So like in terms of like influences, first
Yeah.
maybe since we're talking about composition, who are some of the composers who influenced you?
Yeah. I mean, I always have to give a shout out to Wayne Horvitz, who's somebody that I worked with a lot in Seattle. His compositional approach was very refreshing for me when I moved there, because he used a lot of triads and it just kind of opened things up in a way that I was like, oh, this is really nice. And just like it felt more about sort of sonority or like a sonic space rather than a harmony, if that makes any sense. And I felt like it's just sometimes playing like open fifths or a triad is really refreshing, and his sense of melody I think is really beautiful. Um, so he's a big influence for sure. Um, and I love Ali's stuff, and I love a lot of like singer songwriter stuff like Gillian Welch, and stuff like that. That's just kind of haunting and melodic and very singable, and groove oriented as well.
Yeah, I think that comes through for sure. And then in terms of your trombone playing, who are some of the people that you would?
um, I always like to talk about Don Drummond. Do you know who that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people don't know Don Drummond, but he played with the Scatolites, the early Scatolites, and when they were also backing up Bob Marley. And I remember coming across his playing in college, and again, it was just refreshing for me. It opened things up. There was just like a very slow unfurling of a melodic line, and it was just like teasing you along as a player. And I think, being introduced to like JJ and Curtis Fuller at a young age was cool, but it was a lot to take in.
Sure.
And so I really appreciated, that simplifying and just like, hey, let me just like lay this out and play something again, very melodic, very singable, motivic. So he was a big influence. And then, I mean, of course, JJ, Curtis, Roswell Rudd, I'm a big fan. And I mean, there's just so many great players out there. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Drummond because I teach a class in global popular music, uh,
yeah,
and tomorrow we're talking about, he's one of the people I'll be discussing when I talk about
nice.
ska music. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
mean, from a sort of interpersonal standpoint, he's not a stand-up guy, but
yeah,
from
get
a
the
playing
practice.
from a playing standpoint, I really appreciate it. So
Right, right. That's yeah, but I wasn't expecting that. That's great. Very cool. So when is the record released? Is it out now?
yeah, no, the official release is November 8th, and we're gonna release some singles in the weeks prior to that. So
Mhm.
yeah.
And is it on a label?
Yeah, I'm working with this label called Slow and Steady Records. They're based in San Francisco, and it's a real, community-oriented label that's interested in uplifting West Coast music, basically. There's a lot of great East Coast labels, and they want to bring West Coast more to the forefront. And so, yeah.
Very cool. Nice. So one of the things I was reading in your I guess your press release, there's the statement in there. You do these an advocate for intersectional gender justice in jazz, and you do some workshops to help build awareness. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's kind of taking a different shape that I'm still discovering right now. But when I started doing it, it was it was before Terry Lynn Carrington started this Gender and Jazz Institute, and I would say it was before there was more of a national conversation on gender issues in jazz, or international, I should say. And so I felt like nobody was having these conversations at the time, and I really wished someone was. And I was like, okay, I guess it's me. So I used to, when I would tour, I would go to education spaces, mostly jazz, but sometimes whatever kind of music, and middle school, high school, college, and bring in these activities that really just help bring to light, like, hey, like, we do have a lot of unconscious bias about gender and jazz, and also we would relate that to different races and nationalities too. And that's what I mean by intersectionality. And I would just do my best to field that conversation and be a facilitator and be like, hey, let's really look at this and build our awareness so that we can start to get out of this unconscious way that we stereotype people or put people in a box. And and I do it too. It's like, it's been a learning process for me to be like, hey, what are my biases? And there's a lot to learn there. It's all, unless you grew up in a hole, I think we all have these biases. So that's kind of how it started. And then it's evolved more to having conversations about like specific scenarios that might happen, like in a band room, or like, what would you do if your band teacher said this, or if a peer said this, so that we start to build the tools of like how to address mostly like microaggressions in the moment, things that build up over time that don't seem super egregious, maybe right in the moment, but can be really toxic to an environment over time. So that's kind of how it evolved, and I'm in the process of creating the next evolution. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. I feel like if we're not actively dismantling these toxic narratives, then we're probably uplifting and supporting them.
Right. Now, do you find like within the jazz community, because I sort of feel like there is a higher level of acceptance as opposed to a lot of other fields, or is that something you don't see in your experience?
Acceptance of like different genders and
Yeah, just
national. Yeah.
nationalities, gender, ageism, what have you.
It's, I mean, it's happening more and more, but I don't think it's always been that way. And I do think jazz is behind in a lot of ways. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, and it's so evident when you just see, your typical high school big band or college big band, like who's in the band.
Right.
I'm still seeing, predominantly white men in the band. So I think there's some work to be done there.
Yeah. No, I think I tend to agree. Yeah. Interesting. So, with this album, you're going to be touring?
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I'm doing a couple different iterations of touring. First, I'm going to go out just as a duo with the pianist Marina Albero. We're going to dip down into Oregon and then come back into Washington. So, yeah, mostly Pacific Northwest. I'm going up to Vancouver as a trio into Canada. And then I have a full sextet run of shows around Western Washington in November. So, yeah, I'd love to be getting. You're out in Jersey, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be. I'm looking. I'd love to get some East Coast dates out there. It's DIY touring is difficult to get the funding, but a lot of times what I do is just travel to a region and then I'll hire local players too, which is cool. Although these folks on the record, they've put so much love into this music. I really wish I could feature them too, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I get, I mean, it's just, from a financial standpoint, it's so difficult with this music, especially if you're not one of the 20 big names that
Right.
that can do it, you know. But
Yeah. And a
yeah.
six-piece band. I was like, whoa, six-piece band. Maybe next time I don't do that.
Well,
Yeah.
I can tell you there are a lot of great musicians out here, obviously in New York, but even in New Jersey, who would be very happy to play your music with you. So if you need any recommendations, I'm happy to let you know. So
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I have a lot of friends out there I'd love to play with
sure.
too. So, yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool. So what's next for you?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on a new project that is a, a processing of my experience becoming a mom. And, it's sort of an exploration into in the first couple years, musician and mom felt very separate and like they pulled away from each other, and now it's feeling more like a interwoven thing that supports each other in some ways. So I'm working on writing music for that right now, and I'm still playing with instrumentation. I'm just kind of at the bare bones initial ideas. I have a residency in January to work on that music too in Virginia. So I'm looking forward to really digging in and
Very
yeah.
cool. Very good. Yeah. So I don't know. Tell me, what did I miss? Anything else you want my listeners to know?
Um, I mean, you tell me. What do you what do you like to get into?
I mean, we did the thing. I mean, the only thing I didn't ask you about was your schooling, really. Oberlin, right? That's where you studied.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about that experience.
I was gonna say we could skip that one. No.
Skip it if you like.
What'd you say?
Skip it. We can skip it if you like. It's interesting because a lot of musicians I've talked to, and I talk about jazz and college, and being a college professor, obviously, I toe the line here, but it's very interesting. I get very different perspectives regarding learning music in a college setting and a conservatory setting.
Yeah.
So,
I'll say this. The best thing was playing with my peers and having a place to explore and be inspired. And and I would say Oberlin is a bit more loose than other schools, probably in terms of like, um, it's not super big band oriented. It's just like, I feel like there's more space for people to find their voice there potentially, which I really appreciated. But it was also, going back to the other conversation we were having, just a really toxic in terms of, no representation, lots of microaggressions. Some of my female colleagues like really had an even more terrible situation than I did, and so that was challenging. As an 18-year-old, just I thought I had to deal with that stuff, and in retrospect, I didn't. I could have gone somewhere else, or I could have done something about it, and so that was tricky.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I mean, at the time when I went to Berkeley, and my wife went there as well, I think the female population at the time was maybe 5% or
Yeah,
something, and
yeah.
there was definitely a division there, um, and even a I mean, even a division between the black students and the white students for some time too. Which,
Hmm.
so there was definitely some boundaries that had to be broken down. I don't know if it's still so much the same now, um, but I did see it. Thinking back,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
interesting that you talk about these things. It's
One of
important.
Yeah, I mean, one of the best things I did in college was like I went up to New York during like a winter break, and did a week session with the School for Improvisation there that Ralph Alessi runs, or ran. Maybe he still runs it. And that was probably one of the best, weeks musically for me, just to really dive into free improvisation and open up some doors that kind of felt closed, and work with people like Robbie Coltrane and Mark Helias, and folks like that. It was really really an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, and then in terms of like uh, choosing to play the trombone, was that your first choice of instrument? How'd you come to the trombone?
Yeah, I started on piano, and I wanted to play, fifth grade band opportunities. I was like, I want to play a wind instrument. And I really like the slide. I really resonate with the tenor range. I also have two older brothers who played trumpet and sax, so I didn't want to play those. um, but yeah, it wasn't because I heard something. It was just I liked the sound and the slide, and sort of fell in love with it just playing in band at school. Um, yeah, I didn't have the in retrospect, like it might have been nice to have perspective of like, play the bass. Everyone needs a bass player, but I love the instrument, and I find it to be very expressive, and very soulful and lyrical, and yeah.
Very good, cool. Yeah, I think we did the thing. It was really
All
nice
right.
talking with you.
Yeah,
Uh,
you too.
we'll definitely encourage everyone to check out the new record, Shatter the Glass Sanctuary. Little
Yeah.
November, right?
Yep.
Um, so we'll promote it. But yeah, excellent.
All right. Well, thanks, Jay. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I wish you the best of luck.
All right. Bye bye.